Have you ever felt the specific, crushing weight of your own potential going to waste? It is a distinct sensation, isn't it? It is not the sharp pain of a tragedy, but the dull, aching throb of stagnation. You wake up with a battlefield in your mind, a clear strategy for the day, a list of targets to hit, and a fire in your chest you are going to conquer. But then the sun sets, the shadows lengthen, and you find yourself exactly where you started, only now you are carrying the heavy cargo of guilt. You look at the unfinished tasks, the unkept promises to yourself, and you ask the question that haunts the modern mind. Why can I not simply do what I know I must do? You have tried to answer this. You have thrown money and time at the problem, convinced that the solution was just one purchase away. You bought the glossy planners and the productivity apps that promised to organize your chaos with a sleek interface. You listened to the podcasts that shouted at you to rise and grind, and you read the books that told you to lean in or hustle harder. You tried cold showers and morning routines that started at 4 in the morning. And for a few days, perhaps a week, you felt a flicker of change. But then, the flicker died. The apps were deleted, the planners were shelved, and you slid back into the soft, comfortable embrace of procrastination. You concluded that you were the problem, that you were born without the gene for greatness, that you were simply weak. You are not alone in this failure. Behavioral psychology offers a grim statistic that validates your struggle. Studies on implementation intentions suggest that while having a goal increases the likelihood of success, the actual execution rate for complex new behaviors hovers around a dismal 20%. This means that 80% of the time your brain will default to the path of least resistance. You are fighting a biological imperative to conserve energy, and you are losing. But the reason you are losing is not that you lack willpower. It is because you are fighting a modern war with modern weapons, and they are insufficient. You are trying to hack a system that does not want to be hacked. The Romans understood this better than we do today. They did not look for hacks. They did not look for shortcuts. They built their lives on 3 unshakable pillars. Severitas, the sternness of purpose. Firmitas, the belling. Industria, the diligence of effort. They believed that weakness was not a genetic trait to be managed, but a foreign entity to be killed. They did not negotiate with their comfort. They executed it, and today the story of Melissa Anderson will prove it to you. Melissa Anderson was sitting in her compact apartment in East Nashville, the afternoon light filtering through blinds that desperately needed dusting. At 32, she occupied the strange, suspended animation of the modern middle-class struggle. She was an event planner, a job title that implies control, logistics, and the seamless orchestration of chaos. On the coffee table sat a half-empty mug of coffee, a ring of dried liquid staining the ceramic, a physical manifestation of her inability to finish things. Beside it lay a stack of bridal magazines and vendor catalogs, the tools of her trade, buried under unopened mail and a Kindle she hadn't touched in weeks. The air in the apartment was still, smelling faintly of the takeout she had ordered 3 nights ago. The promise of cooking a healthy meal, another casualty of her chronic exhaustion. Melissa feared becoming the very people she swore she would never emulate. She looked at the older generation in her office, the planners who had stopped caring, the ones who phoned it in, who settled for good enough, and spent their evenings numbing themselves with wine and reality television. That was her anti-model. She saw the glaze in their eyes, the slow erosion of ambition replaced by a comfortable, suffocating complacency. She looked at her bank account, flat and fragile, and then at the vision boards she had created 2 New Year's Eves ago. They were gathering dust in the closet, a collage of destinations she had never visited, business goals she had never hit, and a version of herself that seemed to be receding further into the distance with every passing month. The artifacts of her ambition were tragic in their innocence. She had a notebook dedicated to the Anderson method, the proprietary system for luxury event design she had dreamed up 2 years ago. The first 3 pages were filled with passionate, detailed notes. The rest were blank. She had a subscription to a high-end industry database that cost her $200 a month, a tool meant to connect her with elite clients. She had logged in once. She wanted to build an empire, or at the very least, a reputation that allowed her to walk into a room and command respect. But the reality was a series of near misses and apologies. She was the planner who was always on it, but rarely ever done with it. She had tried to fix this. She deleted her social media apps, convinced that endless scrolling was stealing her time. For 3 days, she was focused. By day 4, she had reinstalled everything using a web browser loophole, telling herself she needed to check a competitor's Instagram story. The detox became a binge. Then came the gamification phase. She downloaded a task management app that turned her to-do list into a role-playing game. She earned points for answering emails and leveling up her character. It worked until she found herself cheating, adding trivial tasks like brush teeth to hear the satisfying ding of completion. The dopamine hit was there, but the actual work remained untouched. By the time the autumn leaves began to turn in Centennial Park, Melissa had reached a dangerous conclusion. She sat on her couch one rainy Wednesday, staring at the rain streaking the window, and admitted the lie she had been fighting. Maybe I just don't have what it takes. Maybe the people who succeed, the ones with the spotless reputations and the thriving businesses, have something I don't. A different brain, a different chemistry. She accepted her weakness as a permanent resident, but then the catalyst arrived. It was not a grand moment of inspiration. It was a mundane necessity. Her primary vendor for audio-visual equipment, a gruff man named Robert who had handled her biggest events for years, abruptly retired. In his place stood a new owner, a man named Elias Thorne. When Melissa went to the warehouse to finalize the contract for an upcoming high-stakes charity gala, she walked into a world that operated on a completely different frequency. Melissa drove to the industrial district on the east side of the Cumberland River, an area of Nashville often overlooked by the tourist crowds. She was there for a signature, nothing more. She had procrastinated on the contract until the last possible second, a classic symptom of her avoidance, and now she had to drive across town in the middle of a workday to fix a problem she should have solved weeks ago. She entered the warehouse expecting the usual chaos of cables, boxes, and harried workers. Instead, she was met with a silence so profound it felt heavy. The air inside the sprawling metal structure was cool and smelled of sawdust and ozone. There was no clutter. Every piece of equipment was arranged with military precision. It felt less like a business and more like a sanctuary, a place where noise was not permitted to exist. Elias Thorne stood in the center of the floor. He was a man in his late 60s, with hands that looked like they had been carved from oak and eyes that seemed to measure you before you had a chance to speak. He did not fidget. He did not check his phone. He stood with a posture that defied gravity, his spine straight, his shoulders relaxed but alert. He radiated a quality that Melissa immediately recognized as dangerous to her current way of life: authority. He looked at her, not with judgment, but with an analytical coldness that made her want to check if her shirt was stained. He said nothing for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable for her, until her own nervous energy began to bubble up. "You are late," Elias said. His voice was low, carrying no malice, just statement of fact. Melissa laughed, a reflex she used to diffuse tension. "Only by 15 minutes. Nashville traffic is a nightmare, you know." Elias did not smile. He did not acknowledge the excuse. He simply looked at the clipboard in his hand and then back at her. "You are here for the charity gala. The AV package is ready. But I have a policy here, Ms. Anderson. I do not do business with people who are late in their minds." Melissa blinked, confused. I don't understand." "You arrived with your mind already behind schedule," Elias said, his voice piercing the air. "You have the look of someone who is constantly chasing yesterday. Why should I trust you with equipment that requires precision when you cannot manage the precision of your own arrival?" Melissa opened her mouth to offer another excuse, another justification, but the words died in her throat. She realized he wasn't talking about the traffic. He was talking about her life. He was asking a question that cut through the superficial pleasantries of her industry. He was challenging the very foundation of her existence. Ask yourself right now, watching this, what would you say if someone stripped away your excuses and asked you why you were perpetually behind? Could you answer? Melissa could not. Elias turned and walked toward a back office, leaving her standing in the silence. "Come back tomorrow at 6 in the morning," he said without looking back. "Do not bring your phone. Do not bring your excuses. If you want the contract, you will earn it. If you want to understand why your life feels like it is spinning out of control, show up. If not, send an assistant next time." The next morning, the sky over Nashville was a bruised purple, the sun not yet cresting the horizon when Melissa walked back into the warehouse. She had not slept well. The indignation she felt on the drive home had curiously dissolved into a strange mix of anxiety and curiosity. She had never been spoken to like that. People usually coddled her, accepted her lateness, and laughed off her disorganization as the creative type. Elias had refused to accept the premise of her personality. The warehouse was quiet, the silence even deeper than the day before. Elias was there, standing in the same spot, as if he had not moved all night. He did not greet her with pleasantries. He handed her a broom. "Sweep the floor," he commanded. "Every inch the dust in the corners is a sign of laziness. Remove it." Melissa stared at the broom. She was a professional. She had a degree. She was here for a business contract, not to be a janitor. Is this necessary? I can pay a cleaning service if the place is dirty." Elias stepped closer, his presence looming, not physically threatening, but intellectually dominant. "This is the first lesson, Melissa. You want to kill the weakness that rots you, but you are too proud to hold a broom. You want the empire, but you despise the bricks. You think weakness is a feeling. It is not. Weakness is a lack of structure." He began to speak, pacing slowly in the cavernous space, his voice echoing slightly. "The Romans built the greatest civilization in history, not because they were smarter than everyone else, but because they embodied a concept called Severitas. It means sternness, seriousness. It is the refusal to be soft. You live in a soft world, Melissa. You use soft words to describe your failures. You don't say I was lazy. You say I was overwhelmed. You don't say I failed. You say I tried my best. Severitas cuts through that fat. It demands that you look at your life with a cold, unblinking eye. You are not overwhelmed. You are undisciplined. Melissa felt the sting of the words, but she did not leave. She gripped the broom handle, her knuckles turning white. She began to sweep. For an hour she swept. The physical repetition was boring, humiliating even. Her mind screamed for distraction. It begged for a podcast, a phone check, a sip of coffee, anything to alleviate the monotony. But Elias was watching, and the silence was absolute. "This is the internal furnace," Elias said, observing her struggle. "You think discipline comes from motivation. It does not. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings are like the weather in Tennessee. They change by the hour. You cannot build a life on weather. You must build on the bedrock. Firmitas. Firmness. You are sweeping this floor not because it needs sweeping, but because you need to learn that your feelings do not dictate your actions. You do not feel like sweeping? Good. Do it anyway. That is where strength is born." He paused, looking at the dust pile she had accumulated. Most people live in a fog. They wake up and they are surrounded by 1,000 choices, 1,000 notifications, 1,000 desires. They freeze. You freeze. You stare at your to-do list and you do nothing because the destination is unclear. You are paralyzed by the uncertainty of destination. Elias walked over to a massive shelving unit filled with hundreds of different cables. "If I told you to organize these cables, you would look at the wall and quit. It is too big." The mind shuts down. The Roman general does not look at the entire enemy army in panic. He looks at the soldier directly in front of him. He thrusts the gladius, one kill, then the next. This is Industria. Diligence. You must create a visible path. He pointed to a small section of the shelf. "You see these 10 cables? Untangle them. Only 10. Do not think about the rest. Do not think about the gala. Do not think about your career. Just the 10 cables." Melissa approached the shelf. Her usual approach to work was a chaotic flurry of multitasking. She would answer an email, half write a proposal, check Instagram, and text a caterer, all in the span of 5 minutes. This felt different. She focused on the first cable. It was knotted and dusty. She worked at the tangle with her fingers. The silence of the warehouse began to change. It shifted from oppressive to clarifying. As she untangled the first cable, she felt a tiny, microscopic sense of completion. A small win. She reached for the second, then the third. By the time she finished the 10th, her mind was quiet. The anxiety that usually hummed in the background of her thoughts had vanished. Modern neuroscience calls this the frontal lobe paradox. When the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making and planning, is overloaded with choices, it triggers a fight-or-flight response known as analysis paralysis. The amygdala takes over and refrees. By reducing the task to a microaction, as Elias instructed with the cables, Melissa bypassed the fear response. She activated the basal ganglia, the part of the brain associated with habit formation and action loops. The Romans did not have MRI scans, but they understood the architecture of the human spirit. They knew that the only cure for the terror of the vast was the victory of the small. Over the next few months, a strange transformation began to take hold in Melissa's life. She continued to show up at the warehouse, not every day, but often. She learned to love the silence. She applied the 10 cables methodology to her event planning. She stopped looking at the entire scope of a wedding and focused only on the immediate next step. She sent the email, then she made the call. Then she ordered the flowers. Her work improved. Her clients noticed. She felt a sense of control she had never experienced. She thought she had been cured, but she was wrong. The methods were working, but they were fragile. She was building a house of stone on a foundation of sand. She was using the tools of Severitas, Firmitas, and Industria, but she was still treating them as tools to be picked up and put down, rather than a new nature to be inhabited. She still kept her phone by her bed. She still allowed the occasional cheat day, where she slipped back into the comfort of the scroll. She believed she had tamed the beast, but she had merely caged it, and the cage was not locked. The disruption arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late February. Melissa was sitting in her office, a space she had finally organized after years of clutter. She was feeling good. She was engaging in what she called strategic planning, which in reality was a sophisticated form of procrastination. She was researching fonts for a new logo instead of finalizing the budget for the upcoming gala, the one Elias had forced her to earn. The gala was 3 days away. She had the AV contract, but she had neglected to confirm the final headcount with the caterer, a detail she assumed was probably fine. She was floating in the dangerous waters of her own competence, believing that her newfound ability to focus on small tasks made her invincible to the larger threats of negligence. The phone rang. It was the venue manager for the gala. His voice was tight, strained. He wasn't calling to chat. He was calling with a crisis. The city had double booked the parking lot. A construction crew was setting up barriers for a marathon, blocking the only access road for the catering trucks. The food couldn't get in. The guests couldn't park. 300 high-profile donors were going to arrive in 48 hours to an empty room with no food and nowhere to park. Melissa felt the blood drain from her face. Her chest tightened, a physical sensation of a steel band clamping around her ribs. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. This was not a tangle of cables. This was not a dust bunny in the corner of a warehouse. This was a disaster. The panic that she had suppressed for months with her micro-habits came rushing back, a tidal wave of anxiety that threatened to drown her. She needed to think. She needed to call the city. She needed to find an alternate route. She needed to move the catering. She stood up, her legs shaking. She looked at her organized desk, her clean inbox, and realized that all of it was theater. Underneath the surface, the old Melissa was still there. She picked up the phone to call Elias, her mentor, her savior. But she stopped. She remembered his voice. "Do not bring me your problems. Bring me your solutions." She remembered the broom. She remembered the cables. She looked at the clock. She had 48 hours to save her career, and the only tool she had was the discipline she had been treating like a hobby. She realized with a horrifying clarity that she had not killed her weaknesses at all. She had just given them a nicer place to live. The drive to the industrial district felt different this time. The night before, she had driven home with a sense of accomplishment, a fragile pride in her ability to sweep a floor. Tonight, she drove with a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, the dashboard lights illuminating a face drawn tight with panic. The crisis at the venue was not just a logistical failure. It was an indictment of her character. She had played it discipline, treating it like a costume she could wear for Elias. And now the costume had torn, revealing the chaotic, terrified woman underneath. She pulled up to the warehouse doors at nearly midnight, the gravel crunching under her tires like broken glass. She didn't expect him to be there. Who works at midnight? But as she approached the small side entrance, the light was already on. Elias sat at a heavy wooden desk, sanding a piece of mahogany with slow, rhythmic strokes. He didn't look up when she burst in, her breath ragged, her words tumbling out in a frantic stream of apologies and explanations. She told him about the parking lot, the construction, the donors, and the impending ruin of her career. She expected him to be angry. She expected him to say, "I told you so." She expected him to turn her away, to wash his hands of the student who had failed the test. But Elias simply continued sanding. The sound of the paper against wood, a soft, persistent scratching, was the only response she got. The silence stretched, forcing Melissa to stop talking, to catch her breath, to stand in the stillness of the room. "This is the real war," Elias said finally, his voice calm, untouched by her hysteria. He set the sandpaper down and looked at her, his eyes piercing through the panic. "You thought the war was against the dust on my floor. You thought the enemy was procrastination. You were wrong. The enemy is entropy. The enemy is the chaos that waits for you to blink. You have been playing at Severitas, Melissa. You have been wearing the armor, but you have not felt the weight of it." "I can't fix this," Melissa whispered, the admission tearing at her throat. "I'm not built for this. I'm not like you." Elias stood up, his movement deliberate and slow. He walked over to her, not with comfort, but with the bearing of a general addressing a frightened soldier. "Panic is the luxury of the weak," he said. "Purpose is the duty of the strong. You are panicking because you are thinking about the outcome. You are imagining the failure. Stop it. The outcome does not exist yet. Only the action exists." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, heavy rumble. "You asked me months ago if you had what it takes. I didn't answer you because the question was meaningless. Potential is a fairy tale. Capacity is built in the fire. This crisis is not a mistake. It is the answer. It is the forge. You say you cannot fix it? Good. That means you must build the solution. You do not sleep tonight. You do not eat until it is done. You go back to that venue, and you impose your will upon it. You find a way. That is the only command that matters." Melissa stood in the doorway of her East Nashville apartment 3 hours later. The city outside was asleep, the distant hum of the interstate the only sign of life. Inside, the silence was absolute. Her laptop screen cast a pale, ghostly blue light across the kitchen table, illuminating the half-empty mug of cold coffee and the scattered sticky notes that represented her war room. The panic had not vanished, but it had changed. It had hardened. It was no longer a wave drowning her. It was a fire burning in her chest. The internal furnace, which Elias had spoken of, was no longer a concept. It was a physical sensation, a tight, hot core in her stomach that refused to let her close her eyes. She sat down. The chair was hard, the air in the room cool against her skin. She opened the spreadsheet for the gala. The old voice whispered in her ear, a seductive, soft sound. "You can do this tomorrow. You are exhausted. Just send an email and hope for the best. No one will blame you if the city messed up the permits." Melissa felt her hand twitch toward the mouse to close the lid. It would be so easy. The comfort of the bed in the next room called to her, a siren song of warm sheets and oblivion. She stopped. She looked at her hand. She forced it to move the cursor, not to close, but to open a new tab. She began to type. She did not type a frantic email. She typed a plan. Action 1. Secure secondary parking. Action 2. Reroute catering trucks. Action 3. Notify the guests of the route change. The tasks were massive, impossible for a mind in a state of chaos. But she remembered the cables. She remembered the 10 cables. She broke the first task into a micro-action. Find one phone number for a satellite lot. She searched. She found it. She dialed. The phone rang. No answer. She dialed again. Voicemail. She left a message, her voice steady, devoid of the trembling fear she felt in her chest. She hung up. That was one vote. One vote for the new Melissa. She moved to the next number, and the next. The night stretched on, a long dark tunnel of effort. She did not check her phone. She did not scroll. She sat in the uncomfortable chair, her back aching, her eyes burning, and she worked. Around 4:30 a.m., the resistance surged again. It was a physical wave of fatigue, a desire to just quit, to let the chips fall where they may. She realized then with startling clarity the difference between doing and being. For years, she had been doing work. She had been checking boxes, sending emails, and going through the motions of an event planner, but she had never been a professional. A professional does not stop when they are tired. A professional stops when the job is done. She realized that identity was not something you claimed. It was something you earned, vote by vote, action by action, in the dark hours when no one was watching. She was not just planning an event anymore, she was building herself. By the time the sun began to bleed over the Nashville skyline, painting the kitchen in shades of orange and gold, Melissa had secured a secondary lot 3 blocks away. She had arranged a shuttle service with a vendor she hadn't used in years, negotiating a rate that would barely leave her a profit margin, but would save the event. She had drafted the new logistics map. She was exhausted, her body screaming for sleep, but her mind was clear. The fog had lifted. The why was no longer abstract. It was concrete. It was the survival of her self-respect. The gala was a blur of motion and noise. Melissa moved through the crowd like a ghost, her eyes scanning for friction, her earpiece crackling with the voices of her team. The shuttle service worked. The food arrived. The donors were happy. There were hiccups, of course. A microphone feedback loop during the opening speech, a centerpiece that tipped over. But Melissa handled them. She didn't panic. She didn't make excuses. She simply fixed them. She stood at the back of the ballroom as the keynote speaker took the stage, watching the 300 guests eat and laugh. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was the venue manager, the man who had called her with the bad news 2 days ago. He didn't say much. He just looked at her, a look of quiet respect in his eyes, and nodded. "You pulled it off," he said. "I didn't think you had it in you. Good work." He walked away. Melissa stood there, the noise of the gala washing over her. She realized then that the why had been the missing piece. She had wanted success for the accolades, for the money, for the vision board, but she had never wanted it for the character it built. The struggle wasn't an obstacle to her life. It was the point of her life. The hard thing was the thing that mattered. Later that week, she returned to the warehouse. The crisis was over. The adrenaline had faded. The world was returning to normal. Elias was in his usual spot, checking inventory. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "The gala proceeded," he stated. It wasn't a question. "It did," Melissa said. "We made it work." Elias nodded slowly. "You survived the fire. Good. But do not mistake a single battle for the war. The urgency of the crisis gave you focus. It forced you to be strong. But the crisis is gone now. The silence returns. The comfort returns. This is where most people fail. They think they are fixed because they handled the emergency. But the emergency was external. The true test is internal. When there is no fire, will you still tend the furnace, or will you let the cold back in? Melissa looked at the broom in the corner. She thought about her apartment, the clean desk, the organized files. She thought about the comfort of her bed, the lure of the easy path. The old Melissa was still there, lurking in the shadows of her mind, waiting for a moment of weakness. 3 months passed. The gala was a distant memory. It was a Tuesday morning, raining heavily in Nashville. The sky was a dark gray slate, the kind of weather that begs you to stay under the covers. Melissa woke up to the sound of the rain against the window. The bed was warm. The room was dark. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A notification. She reached for it, the old instinct firing in her brain. Check the phone, check the world, let the noise in. Her fingers brushed the cool glass screen. She stopped. She pulled her hand back. She remembered the legionary. The Roman soldier did not ask if the weather was good. He did not ask if he was well rested. He stood his post. He marched. He built. She sat up, swinging her legs out of the bed and placing her feet on the cold floor. The sensation was jarring, unpleasant. It was perfect. She stood up. She didn't check the phone. She walked to the kitchen, started the coffee, and opened her planner. The day was not an emergency. It was just a day. But she would treat it with the same severity. She would treat it as a chance to vote for her identity again. Science tells us that this moment, this quiet rejection of the dopamine hit, is where the brain physically rewires itself. Neuroplasticity is not just a buzzword. It is a biological reality. Every time Melissa chose the cold floor over the warm bed, every time she chose the silence over the scroll, she was strengthening the neural pathways of the prefrontal cortex and weakening the impulsive connections of the limbic system. She was literally carving a new architecture into her brain. Identity is not a lightning strike of realization. It is the slow, painful, beautiful accretion of choices made in the dark. It is built in the silence of routine. 5 years later, the East Nashville apartment was gone. Melissa stood in the corner office of a renovated warehouse space overlooking the Cumberland River. It was her building now. Anderson Events had become the premier planning firm in the region, known not for creativity, which was common, but for execution, which was rare. The office was clean, minimalist, and ordered. The shelves were lined not just with awards, but with plans, binders, and maps. The tools of Industria. She walked to the window, looking out at the city. She thought about this 32-year-old woman who used to sit in a cluttered apartment, paralyzed by a blank page and a failed to-do list. She didn't resent that woman anymore. She felt a strange gratitude for her. The struggle had been the chisel. The weakness had been the marble. Without the weight of her own inadequacy, she would never have been forced to grow the muscle to carry it. A junior planner, a young woman in her mid-20s, knocked on the open door. She looked frazzled, holding a clipboard, a look of overwhelmed panic in her eyes that Melissa recognized instantly. "Ms. Anderson," the girl said, her voice shaking slightly. "The florist for the Lambert wedding just called. There's a supply chain issue with the white hydrangeas. They can't get them. The bride is going to kill us." Melissa turned from the window. She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She felt the familiar heat in her chest, the internal furnace clicking on. She walked over to her desk, her movement calm, her posture radiating Firmitas. She looked at the young woman with a stern but not unkind expression. "Close the door," Melissa said. "Sit down. We are not going to panic. We are going to solve this. We are going to find a new solution, and we are going to do it now." She looked at the girl, seeing her younger self. The weakness was there, but so was the potential. You have seen the transformation. You have witnessed the cost of the old life and the architecture of the new one. But the story is no longer about her. It is about you. What is your real motive? Why are you watching this? Is it to feel a moment of inspiration, a temporary jolt of motivation that will fade before you sleep tonight? Or is it because you are ready to stop negotiating with your own weakness? You must understand that your weakness is not a flaw in your design. It is a signal. It is the pain that tells you where the work needs to be done. Do not numb it. Do not ignore it. Listen to it. It is showing you exactly where you are. Soft. It is showing you the battlefield. The Romans did not conquer the world by hoping their enemies would go away. They conquered by marching into the valley and doing the hard thing. Severitas, Firmitas, Industria. These are not just words. They are the pillars of a temple you must build inside yourself. Severitas, the sternness to look at your excuses and call them lies. Firmitas, the firmness to hold your ground when the comfort screams at you to quit. Industria, the diligence to take one small step and then another and another until the destination is reached. You have the tools. You have the blueprint. The question is no longer, can you do it? The question is, will you? If you are ready to kill the weakness and forge a new character, type your why in the comments below. Make it public, make it real, and if you want to continue building the discipline required to change your life, subscribe to the channel. The war is waiting, and we are just getting started.